While 2023 has been an eventful year, 1963 has a special place in the heart of the city of Chicago. And to kind of take a look back at history, I'm here with Paul Chivari. I'm Mike Mercado on the Sports Cubicle. And Paulie, the Chicago Bears, obviously always near and dear and in the forefront of news here in Chicago, the NFL king in the United States. And this is something that I think you and I kind of went down a weird rabbit hole to talk about the world champion Chicago Bears in 1963, a team that, if you're looking at them, probably should be made of a movie when you think about who they had to beat to get to the championship game, how they won the championship game, their record, some of the names on this roster, especially, you're here in Chicago, and anytime you hear Bears, Ditka's coming up, and yet his tie to this team. So this is something you actually brought to me, and you, a historian on not just MLB, but loving history of sports. What drew you to the 63 Bears, not just it being the 60-year anniversary, but the awesomeness that is kind of the white seed, navy blue Chicago Bears?
I think, the 60 years was the big reason, the main reason. Like, now's a good time to look back. But also, they won a championship. This was the last before the Super Bowl era that they won. And I think with me being kind of a generation or two removed from it, I remember my uncle and my grandparents kind of talking about the 63 Bears. But when you're little and you don't really have a concept of time, you kind of confuse the 40s and the 60s like they were right next to each other. So, I'm thinking as a little kid, like T formation, and it's a different team. This is, Billy Wade and Mike Ditka and, Richie Pettibone and Ed O'Bradovich and those guys. Johnny Morris, and then just how dominant they were when you look back on it. I think this is I don't know if there's been any since. I would think maybe the Ravens, but I think only the third team in history where the defense led the league in fewest yards given up, fewest passing yards given up, and fewest total yards given up. And maybe total points, but I'm not sure about that one. But dominant defensive team. And this might be when Monsters of the Midway got coined, because they truly were the monsters. But, what a crazy schedule. It's back when it was 14 games. There's something really huge that jumps out to me about this schedule when you think about it chronologically. What jumps out to you when you look at this schedule when they play it? How crazy of a schedule this is. At
one point, you're doing 3 road games. At one point, you have 3 straight home games to California run that they have to go to.
So look at the first. Let's go the first 6 weeks. Yeah. At Green Bay, at Minnesota, at Detroit.
Crazy.
At home for one against the Colts at Wrigley Field.
The Baltimore Colts.
And then you go to the West, way out West, even though you're the Western Conference, at Rams, at 49ers. So right off the bat, the first 6 weeks, they're on the road 5 times, including 2 way out in the West Coast.
So, it's funny, just in that little breakdown, we skipped over the fact, and
we'll go over some of that.
All the games. I some context to this. George Halas is still the coach of this team. Mm-hmm. They're playing
his fourth stint.
Yeah, and they're playing at Wrigley Field. Mm-hmm. So there is a real connection to this kind of last championship. And then when you bring up the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, there's remnants of what we know today.
Yeah,
the
NFC Central, the NFC North. Could you imagine, what if I told you right now, the Bears' schedule's been released, they got to go on the road and play at Green Bay, at Minnesota, and at Detroit to start the season.
It's there's the season. Yeah. The season's determined the first 3 weeks of the season there. Already. Yeah.
And the Green Bay Packers are the defending national champions, or defending NFL champions the previous season. So they start at Lambeau in that game against them.
So we're going to go down the schedule in a second, because I think this is a formidable schedule, it's a formidable record, and what the Packers and the Bears both did in 63. I think it's always important to remember where you came from. But, I always tease the NFL more than any other sport because of my frustration with the 85 Bears about championships and Super Bowls. So let's take nothing away from the historic meaning of what the 63 Bears did. How much stock do you put in football world championships compared to Super Bowls?
I think they're important because, even though this is technically in the AFL, NFL era, they're still kind of figuring out just how these leagues are meshing, which one's better, which one's not. Are they truly competitors? Kind of like the AL, NL in 1901 for baseball. But yeah, I put a lot of stock into it because this is the origins of the NFL. I don't know what if someone came to you and said, all right, every Super Bowl from like 1 through 25 is invalid because it just wasn't really that competitive. Yeah, we've got something even better. We've reformed the entire system, to have the best two teams play each other.
Just to kind of give you an idea of where my mindset is in this is I think of the ABA NBA mergers kind of when I really think about the championships kind of taking a new level because of that. Then I think about the segregation, the integration of the Negro League to MLB is kind of a different way.
Because like best out of 14 teams in this case, where it's like, like the Celtics were whooping up on everyone, and it was like only 10 teams in the league back then. But yeah, there's an element of that. And then also the championship game was played at Wrigley because they had the better record. So in a way, you could argue that these feel more like conference championships nowadays than they are Super Bowls. But this was the end all be all.
This is what they had.
I don't know who won the AFL in 1963.
Yeah.
But whoever that was, I think would have to go against the Bears in that quote unquote, Super Bowl -3 or whatever, You
can only play your schedule and you play what's given. It's the same thing. I'm never going to take away from the Dodgers winning a World Series
in the pandemic
or when the Lakers. We can make fun of
it.
We can have jokes.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you don't take away what you still had to do, because had the Bulls or Cubs White Sox had won either those championships, we'd be hanging up banners here at the studio. So you're 100% correct.
Don't get me wrong. I was looking up every team that had like a Power 5 sort of celebration year. We almost talked about the National League champion 1938 Cubs, but I figured only championships. If we're going to take a look back, it can only be true championships. So
it's interesting you bring up the Cubs. I was looking at this too because obviously we're talking about the 63 Bears, but the 60s in Chicago, you had the 69 Cubs.
Yeah.
So there was some vibes going on.
But they didn't win anything.
And it's that weird. I want to put myself as a sports fan in Chicago at that time, how important was this for them?
This looked important.
Because if you imagine if this season, this coming up year, right, we take that where the Cubs are in the playoffs, the Bears are in the playoffs. It's important. The White Sox are in the playoffs. The Blackhawks. It doesn't matter. This city gets up for a huge winner, and especially a dominant winner like the 63 Bears. I wonder if you're looking I'm thinking of A Christmas Story, Ralphie's dad, looking at the newspaper talking about Bears Packers, how important the 63 Bears were to Chicago. They must have been as important as anything else because it's still cemented almost the legacy, right?
See, I think so, and it's hard for me to kind of place that because I was so young when the '85 Bears happened that all I knew was that, and that was in the throes of it, So all those household names back then. But I'm telling you, growing up though, I remember my grandpa was a big Bears fan, could tell me about the '40s Bears, the early '60s Bears, and then with my uncle probably being a teenager around this time has talked about so I knew the names Johnny Morris and Willie Gallimore and of course Mike Ditka and Billy Wade and Pettibone and Obradovich. Those
Shadow Obradovich.
I think
was Buffon?
I think Buffon was a little bit later than this.
Okay, because I didn't see him on the roster, but we always, anytime you can mention Doug Buffon, we're going to. So.
And then kind of watching some highlights on this, I learned about Joe Marconi. He's such a bruiser of a fullback.
Such a Bears name.
And their kicker too, Roger LeClaire. He was a big dude. Yeah. You know how nowadays the kicker's the smallest dude on the team? Roger LeClaire was not the smallest dude on the team.
I love that. That's why I love Justin Tucker. Give me a beefy unit of a punter, please.
And looking at of course this is still an era where the pass is not as dominant as it is, nowadays. But Mike Ditka was such a force, being a tight end, but also I think just almost in a way like a third or fourth receiver for them. Just really, a bruiser himself, just kind of getting the ball. There was one game late in the season against Pittsburgh. It ended up being a tie game. But they, he needed a big, they needed a big play. He got it. It was dump of a pass 10 yards or whatever, and then he just pounds his way down another 30, 40 yards. So, I think he was even, this is why he's a Hall of Famer. I think he was one of the, Pro Bowl or whatever it was, all pro back in the day. So, Ditka, a force on this team. We don't have to go game by game here, but there's some highlights that I picked up so they start at Green Bay. It's the defending champs. the Green Bay Packers hadn't lost at home since 1960, and the last team to do that was the Bears in 1960.
That's crazy.
Their first home games in Week 4.
That context, really fast. I didn't mean to interrupt, but like just think about that.
To start the season like that.
Yeah, and you imagine for you, Paulie, like let's make it personal for you. The Raiders go to Arrowhead after 3 years of the Chiefs being undefeated, and they go in there and they beat them to start a championship season. Like that is,
and then
huge.
have to go to like SoFi Stadium and then with Denver or whatever.
Mile High, crazy.
Ditka gets 4 touchdowns against the Los Angeles Rams. They whoop up the Rams 52-14 Week 5. But then Week 6, they're back out west, San Francisco. Now, like the Niners were terrible in this era.
So crazy to think.
But this is like David upsets Goliath. 20-14, Kezar Stadium, San Francisco. So that's the only loss all season, what we eventually find out. And it's weird that it comes to a team like San Francisco. But then you flash forward some tough they beat up on Philadelphia. I think that was the out of conference game. They take care of the Colts in Baltimore. Of course they have a tough one against the Rams back at home. The Packers Week 10 though 26-7 dominating them, like they were in charge the whole time. But both teams 8-1 going into that game. It's really going to determine the conference. It more or less might determine the NFL, since we got last year's champions and the way the Bears are playing this season. Lombardi and Hallis at
Wrigley Field.
Wrigley Field. Yeah.
Start out at Lambeau, and then in November before Thanksgiving, you're in Wrigley.
So now here's the weird thing. So their next two, Week 11, Week 12, tie and tie, both coincidentally 17-17. Now, what happened between November 17th, 1963 and November 24th, 1963? Major American history moment where they have to even determine if they're even going to play games on November 24th, 1963.
Is this when Jack Ruby killed?
Well, this is JFK on the 22nd, and then I think probably the 23rd or 24th.
Okay,
is
so
Jack
we're there.
Ruby.
We're right there already.
But the NFL decides to play games.
Did they play in Texas? Were the Cowboys playing at that Texas that day?
So the Texans, the Dallas Texans were eventually the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah. I'm not sure if they're the Texans or the Chiefs at this moment, but that's AFL. AFL decides not to play.
Okay. Wow.
NFL decides to play because I think it was Pete Rozelle said Kennedy was big on football and the spirit of competition, so we're going to keep playing because of that. Now, I'm wondering if that sort of lingering in the air kind of killed the momentum that the Bears had going into that. A 4-game win streak. Yeah, going into Pittsburgh is tough. I'm sure the Steelers were a tough team back then. And then they come home and play a tough Minnesota team, Norm Van Brocklin. Yeah. But 2 ties right there. I'm wondering if maybe they could have gotten wins there, go 13-1 that season.
I didn't even think of that.
I thought that was kind of interesting with just the timing of everything. But then they finish off the season, wins against San Francisco 27-7 to make up for the loss, and then the Detroit Lions, which was a tough one. They were behind in that game and eventually had to work their way back into it. It was a must-win game, a win or a tie, must-win or tie game. A loss would have given Green Bay the division. And Bears end up winning, through the help of, certain guys, like I was saying, Joe Marconi, Benny McRae had a couple pick sixes during the season. We talked about Johnny Morris, Willie Gallimore, Mike Ditka, Billy Wade. They had 39 interceptions, a team record at the time. That's crazy. I mean, if you think about it nowadays, that's pretty crazy, 39 interceptions. Yeah. But yeah, they end up playing the Giants in the championship game. Top offense, the Giants, versus the top defense, Bears. Last time the Bears were in an NFL championship game, they lost to the Giants in 1956. Bears end up winning that game close. It came down late, but they had, I think, 5 interceptions on Y.A. Tittle. They were beating up on him all day. Tittle throws like an interception to Pettibone late in the fourth quarter as they were trying to drive downfield and take the lead, and the rest is history. The Bears are national champions, world champions at home at Wrigley Field, beating the New York Giants for their 8th championship.
Yeah, it was their 7th or 8th, I believe. I think it was their 7th.
I didn't have it in front of me.
I think 8 was the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that, and I'm so happy you brought this to the forefront. I'm so glad we brought a spotlight to this. I highly suggest any sportsman, especially the young kids, the youths that are listening to us on the interwebs, all over social media, on Sports Cubicle TV, on YouTube. You found this here on WCPT. Check out these 63 Bears. Go down the rabbit hole of some of the historic teams, some of the historic players that you hear about. It's always a fun time to just throw it on YouTube and
I watched the newsreels on YouTube, and it was really neat to see. And like really underrated guy that I'd never heard of before this, like Joe Marconi for sure, and Benny McRae on defense. Really huge, especially like clutch when you needed him against Detroit and against New York late in the season.
So I'll leave us with a philosophical question. You guys can leave a comment down below, or of course all over social media. 63 to 85.
Oh, don't even compare the two.
22 years in between championships. Yeah. It is 2023 moving forward since 1985. How frustrated is there a comparison between the frustration of Bears fans in 1984, the same way there is Bears frustration in 2023 in between championships? I want to know the fervor. Did 22 years pass by? Were Bears fans still loyal to the team, or were they ready?
Well, you got to remember there's some tough years in there.
That's
there's
what I'm saying.
The
so
Neil Armstrong and what Jack Pardee.
Yeah,
and
it wasn't good.
Yeah, it was not. You were talking like Peyton was the only like shining ruby on that entire coal mine there.
So let us know. What do you think? Do you think Bears fans were more hungry, more angry than they were?
I would say they're more hungry today.
Let us know. Sports Cubicle TV on the comment section below.